Jamal was a boy who never stood out in the way other kids did. He was heavier than most of his classmates, and his round face, broad shoulders, and slow steps made him an easy target for teasing. From the very first day he entered the school gates, he carried the label of being the fat kid. He was only 12, but the world had already decided who he was supposed to be. He walked through the hallways with his head slightly lowered, hoping no one would notice him, but people always did. His classmates would whisper, laugh, or sometimes say things directly to his face that stung more than any bruise ever could. Despite all this, Jamal was gentle at heart. He loved drawing superheroes in his notebook, he enjoyed helping his mother with small chores, and he found comfort in reading comic books at night. He was the type of boy who never looked for trouble, who believed that if he stayed quiet and minded his own business, the world might leave him alone. But that wasn't how things worked. The world around him seemed to think his quietness meant weakness, and in school, weakness was like blood in the water. His mother, a strong woman who worked 2 jobs, always told him, "Baby, don't let them change who you are. Keep your head up, and one day they'll see your worth." Jamal listened, but her words felt far away when he was sitting at the lunch table alone, while kids pointed at him from across the cafeteria. Sometimes they took his food, laughing as they ran away with it. Other times, they made animal sounds when he walked past, as though his body was something to laugh about. He wanted to be invisible, but his body never let him disappear. Teachers noticed bits and pieces of what was happening, but they often brushed it off as kids being kids. No one truly saw the weight Jamal carried inside. It wasn't just about being teased, it was about how every insult dug deep into him, how every shove in the hallway reminded him that he was alone. He learned to wear a mask, smiling faintly whenever someone looked at him, pretending he didn't hear the words. But when he went home, sitting quietly in his small bedroom, he would stare at the ceiling and wonder why people hated him for simply existing. Yet, inside Jamal, there was something even he didn't fully understand. Beneath his soft smile and heavy frame was a fire. It wasn't loud or flashy, but it was there, waiting. He had felt it sometimes, like when someone pushed him too hard and for a second his fists clenched before he forced himself to let go. Or when someone threw his books on the floor and he bent down to pick them up while his jaw tightened. He always swallowed the anger, but every time, a little more of that fire grew. At home, Jamal often watched martial arts movies on an old TV his uncle had given them. He liked how the heroes in those stories weren't always the strongest or the tallest, but they had skill, courage, and discipline. Sometimes, when his mother wasn't around, he would stand in front of the mirror and mimic the moves he had seen. Punches, kicks, blocks, clumsy at first, but with time, he grew faster. His body, though big, was not without strength. He didn't know it yet, but those secret sessions were shaping him. Still, Jamal didn't think of himself as a fighter. He thought of himself as a survivor. He woke up early, put on clothes that were always a little too tight, and went to school hoping it would be a good day. But good days were rare. Most mornings, as he walked to the bus stop, he could already hear the whispers of the kids who waited there. They would laugh, calling him slow, telling him the bus might tip over if he sat on one side. Jamal kept walking, holding back the tears that sometimes threatened to come. He told himself over and over again, if I just stay quiet, it will pass. His teachers noticed he was a bright boy. He answered questions well when he gathered the courage, and he loved history. But his quietness made him fade into the background. Only once in a while did someone truly notice him. One teacher, Mrs. Carter, once told him, "You have more inside you than you realize." He nodded politely, but deep inside, he doubted her. He didn't feel strong or special. He felt like the boy everyone laughed at. Jamal's mother continued to remind him that he was valuable, that the world was bigger than the walls of his school. She worked long hours, sometimes not returning until late at night, but she always checked on him, asking how his day had gone. He never told her the truth. He didn't want to add to her worries. Instead, he would smile faintly and say, "It was okay." But when she left his room, he would sit alone in silence, feeling the sting of every insult replaying in his mind. Even with all of this, Jamal carried himself with quiet dignity. He never hit back, never shouted, never gave the bullies the satisfaction of seeing him cry. But what no one knew, not his teachers, not his mother, not even Jamal himself, was that the fire inside him was growing, shaping him into something none of them could predict. Every day that passed without him fighting back was like adding pressure to a sealed jar. Sooner or later, the lid would blow off. Jamal didn't know when or how, but something inside him whispered that a day would come when he wouldn't be able to hold it in anymore. And when that day arrived, the world would see a different Jamal, not the quiet, heavy boy they mocked, but the fighter that life itself had been building all along. For now, though, Jamal continued to walk his path as the silent target. He still drew his superheroes, still dreamed of a world where he could be one of them. He still held his mother's words close to his heart, even if he didn't always believe them. But under the surface, his story was slowly changing. His silence wasn't weakness, it was the calm before the storm. The bullies thought they knew him. They thought he was harmless. They thought he would always be the one to take the blows without ever giving one back. They had no idea that the boy they laughed at was on the edge of becoming someone none of them would ever forget. As the days passed, the bullying around Jamal became worse. It was no longer just whispers in the hallways or quick laughs behind his back. The older kids had started to take things further. They pushed him when teachers weren't looking, knocked his books out of his hands, and sometimes blocked his way just to make him late for class. It felt as if every corner of the school had become a trap for him, a place where humiliation waited. Jamal tried to stay calm, reminding himself of his mother's advice to avoid trouble. He walked away whenever possible, even when his heart screamed for him to push back. But the truth was, walking away did not make the pain smaller. It made it worse. Every step away felt like a small piece of his pride was being taken from him. He went home each day heavier, not just from his body, but from the weight of his silence. One afternoon, during lunch break, things went further than usual. Jamal sat alone at his table, quietly eating the sandwich his mother had packed. A group of boys, bigger than him and known for stirring trouble, approached his table. They didn't sit down, they loomed over him, their shadows covering his meal. One of them reached out and snatched his sandwich, taking a loud bite as the others laughed. Another boy tipped over Jamal's milk carton, letting the liquid spill across the table and drip onto the floor. The cafeteria erupted in laughter. Jamal sat frozen, his fists clenched under the table, but his face remained blank. He had taught himself not to show pain, not to give them the satisfaction. Inside, though, a storm was growing. He could feel his chest tighten, his heart pounding harder than usual. He wanted to stand up and take back what was his, but he told himself to stay seated. His mother's words echoed in his mind, "Be patient. Don't let them drag you into their darkness." He swallowed his pride like he swallowed his food, quietly, without letting anyone see how much it hurt. That night, when he got home, he avoided his mother's eyes. She asked him how his day had gone, and he gave the same answer as always, "It was fine." But when he shut his bedroom door, his mask slipped away. He sat on the floor, staring at his empty hands. His thoughts ran wild. What if he had stood up? What if he had pushed back? Could he have ended it there? Or would it have only made things worse? The questions circled his mind endlessly. To calm himself, Jamal did what he had begun to do in secret. He stood in front of his mirror and mimicked the moves from the martial arts movies he loved so much. His punches started slow, but he practiced over and over, until sweat rolled down his forehead and his arms ached. The sound of his fists cutting through the air gave him a strange kind of relief, as if each strike against the invisible opponent in front of him was a strike against the laughter that haunted his ears. It became his private ritual. Every night, after finishing his homework, Jamal would close his door and practice. At first, it was only a few minutes, but soon it stretched into hours. He learned to balance his weight, to move faster, to control his breath. Though he had never stepped into a real gym or learned from a real coach, his determination became his teacher. He didn't even realize how strong his body was becoming. His arms grew firmer, his steps quicker, and his endurance stronger. His body, once seen as slow and clumsy, was secretly turning into something powerful. At school, however, none of this was visible. To everyone else, he was still the quiet, chubby boy who carried his books close to his chest and avoided eye contact. The bullies still circled him like predators. But Jamal's inner world was shifting. Every insult that was thrown at him now felt less like an injury and more like fuel. The fire inside him grew hotter with every passing day. One evening, his mother came home earlier than usual and caught him practicing in his room. At first, she stood at the door quietly, watching his movements. When Jamal finally noticed her, he froze, embarrassed. He thought she would laugh at him, or tell him to stop wasting time. But instead, she smiled. "You've got fight in you," she said softly. "But remember, real strength is not about hurting others, it's about protecting yourself and knowing when to use it." Her words sank deep into Jamal's heart. He nodded, but he also knew something she didn't. Sooner or later, he would be tested. The turning point came not long after. It was a Wednesday afternoon, and Jamal was walking home from school with his backpack slung over one shoulder. He usually took the long route to avoid trouble, but that day he was tired and chose the shorter path by the basketball court. He didn't notice the group of boys following him until it was too late. They called out his name, mocking him as they walked faster. Jamal tried to ignore them, but his steps slowed when they surrounded him. One boy shoved his shoulder, making him stumble. Another laughed and pulled at his backpack straps. They were bigger, louder, and full of confidence because they thought they knew who Jamal was, the boy who never fought back. Jamal's chest tightened again, his fists curling at his sides. For a moment, he thought about running, but his feet refused to move. Something inside him told him he was done running. The boys continued to jeer, pushing him back and forth like a toy. Jamal's vision blurred as anger flooded his mind. He remembered the countless nights of practicing in his room, the sweat, the punches, the fire building inside him. His body tensed like a coiled spring, ready to snap. He hadn't decided yet, but his heart already knew the day he had feared for so long had finally arrived. That night, as Jamal lay in bed, he replayed everything in his mind. He hadn't fought back yet, not fully. But for the first time, he felt something different. He wasn't just angry, he was prepared. The fear that used to grip him was giving way to something else, something sharper, stronger. The bullies had no idea that their constant torment had awakened a side of him they couldn't control. They had pushed him into a corner for too long, and the boy they thought was weak was no longer the same. The storm inside Jamal was ready to break free. The afternoon sun hung low in the sky, and the basketball court looked empty except for the group of boys who had cornered Jamal. The sound of the bouncing ball in the distance had faded, replaced by the mocking voices of those around him. Jamal stood in the middle, his backpack slipping off one shoulder, his heart beating so loudly it felt like everyone could hear it. His palms were sweaty, his knees shaky, but deep inside, something else was taking control. The months of silence, the endless laughter at his expense, and the fire he had kept hidden were all rising to the surface. One of the boys stepped closer, his grin wide, confident. He shoved Jamal again, harder this time, forcing him a step back. Another joined in, tugging at his shirt, making fun of the way it stretched across his chest. The rest of the group stood in a circle, clapping, laughing, treating it like a show. To them, it was just another game of breaking down the quiet boy who never fought back. They didn't realize the boy they thought they knew wasn't standing there anymore. Jamal's breath came faster. He remembered all the nights of punching the air, the careful movements in front of his mirror, the sweat dripping down his forehead as he practiced alone. His body remembered even if his mind was still catching up. When the boy shoved him again, Jamal's hand shot up without thinking. He grabbed the bully's wrist, and for a second, silence fell. The boys looked surprised. This was not the reaction they expected. The boy tried to pull his arm free, but Jamal's grip tightened. His strength, hidden beneath his round frame, shocked even himself. He pushed the hand away and stepped forward instead of back. His heart raced, but this time, not from fear. Something inside him had shifted. The bully saw it in his eyes, the way his gaze no longer looked down at the ground but straight at them. Another boy, taller than Jamal, stepped in and tried to shove him hard in the chest. Jamal's body reacted before his thoughts could catch up. His feet planted firmly, and his arm swung out, pushing the boy's chest back. The taller boy stumbled a few steps, his grin fading into surprise. The others froze for a moment, exchanging quick glances. They had never seen Jamal push back, never seen him stand tall. The circle grew tighter, their mocking replaced with nervous laughter. "What's this? Fat boy thinks he's tough now," one of them sneered, but his voice cracked slightly. Jamal's breathing grew steady, his fists clenching at his sides. His body felt alive, charged with energy. He wasn't thinking about winning or losing, he was thinking about the months of pain, the stolen lunches, the spilled milk, the endless nights of feeling powerless. All of it surged inside him, giving his arms strength, giving his legs speed. When the first punch came his way, Jamal didn't freeze like before. His instincts, sharpened by his secret practice, took over. He ducked slightly, his shoulder rolling back, and his fist shot out clumsily but with force. The bully's laughter turned into a gasp as the punch landed harder than anyone thought possible. A stunned silence spread through the group. Jamal stared at his own hand, shocked at what he had just done. But there was no time to think. Another boy charged at him, swinging wildly. This time, Jamal moved quicker. His body felt heavy but firm, each step planted with purpose. He raised his arms, blocking clumsy blows, and with surprising strength, shoved the boy aside. The sound of feet scraping against the pavement echoed as the bully stumbled back. The group's confidence started to crumble. They were used to Jamal standing still, taking their jokes and shoves. They weren't prepared for resistance, and certainly not this kind of force. The fight wasn't clean, not like the movies Jamal loved. There were no fancy kicks or perfect moves. But what he lacked in Polish, he made up for with raw power and determination. Every shove, every punch, every step forward carried the weight of years of being underestimated. The bullies realized too late that Jamal was not the boy they had imagined. He was faster, stronger, and most of all, relentless. The boys who had been laughing now backed away, their eyes wide, their voices unsure. One of them tried to laugh it off, saying, "Calm down, man, we were just playing." But Jamal didn't feel like it was a game anymore. His chest rose and fell quickly, his fists still tight, but his eyes burned with a strength they had never seen. He didn't chase them, didn't shout, didn't boast. He simply stood there, solid, like a wall they couldn't move. The group hesitated, then slowly began to retreat, muttering excuses as they walked away. Some rubbed their arms where Jamal's strength had surprised them, others avoided his eyes completely. The boy who had been shoved the hardest looked back once, his face pale with disbelief. Jamal didn't move, didn't speak. He just watched them leave. When the last of them disappeared down the street, Jamal finally let out a long breath he hadn't realized he was holding. His body shook, not from fear, but from the rush of adrenaline. His hands trembled as he looked down at them, still unable to believe what he had done. For so long, he had thought of himself as weak, the boy who couldn't fight back. But today, something different had happened. Today, he had stood his ground. He picked up his backpack from the ground, dusted it off, and walked slowly toward home. His legs felt heavy, but his heart felt lighter than it had in months. The world looked different, he looked different. He wasn't just the fat boy anymore. He wasn't just the quiet kid who avoided trouble. Somewhere deep inside, he had found a strength he never thought he had. That night, Jamal lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling. The fight replayed in his mind again and again, the grip on the bully's wrist, the first shove that didn't move him, the shock in their eyes when he pushed back. He realized something important: all those nights of secret practice, all the times he clenched his fists in silence, had prepared him for this moment. He hadn't planned it, but his body knew what to do. He thought about what his mother had said about strength being more than hurting others. She was right. He didn't feel proud because he hurt someone. He felt proud because he had finally refused to let himself be broken. He had defended himself, shown that he wasn't as weak as they believed. For the first time in his life, Jamal felt like he had control. The next day at school, whispers followed him through the halls. The story had already spread. "Did you hear?" Jamal stood up to the bullies. Some kids looked at him with wide eyes, others with quiet respect. Even the teachers noticed how he walked a little taller, how his eyes no longer avoided theirs. The bullies stayed away from him, at least for now. They weren't ready to test the boy who had surprised them all. Jamal didn't smile or brag. He stayed quiet, just as he always had. But this time, his silence wasn't weakness, it was power. And though he didn't say a word, everyone could feel it. The fight near the basketball court changed everything for Jamal. It was as if overnight, the invisible wall that had separated him from the rest of the school shattered. The next morning when he stepped onto the bus, the usual laughter and taunts were missing. Instead, people stared at him in silence, some whispering quietly to each other. Jamal kept his head steady, his face calm, but inside he felt the strange weight of all those eyes. For the first time, they were not looking at him with mockery, they were looking at him with something closer to respect, and perhaps a little fear. As he walked through the school hallways, he noticed the difference in every corner. The bullies who usually pushed him against lockers now stepped aside, pretending to be busy with their own conversations. A few students who had never spoken to him before gave him nods, small acknowledgments that surprised him. Even the teachers seemed to look at him differently, noticing the way he carried himself with a quiet strength. Jamal didn't say much, but his silence now held a different kind of power. Yet inside, Jamal was confused. He had wanted the bullying to stop, and now it seemed like it had. But he also didn't feel at peace. His mind kept replaying the moment when his fists had struck, when his strength had surprised not only the bullies but himself. There had been a rush, a flood of adrenaline that made him feel alive, powerful, unstoppable. But after the rush came the questions. Did he enjoy it? Did it make him just like the bullies he hated? That evening, when Jamal returned home, his mother noticed the change in him immediately. He sat taller at the dinner table, his shoulders squared, his voice clearer when he spoke. She asked him if everything was okay, and for once, Jamal didn't give his usual answer of "it was fine." He hesitated, then finally said, "They don't bother me anymore." His mother looked at him carefully, sensing there was more to the story. She didn't press him for details, but she reminded him softly, "Remember, strength is a gift. Use it to protect yourself, not to hurt others." Jamal nodded, though deep inside he was still trying to understand what that truly meant. In the days that followed, Jamal noticed that his world had changed. Kids who used to laugh at him now avoided him, unsure of what he might do. Some even seemed afraid, whispering stories about how he had stood up to the bullies. The story had grown in the telling. Some said he had fought off 5 boys at once, others claimed he had trained like a secret champion all along. Jamal didn't correct them. He let the rumors swirl around him, though he knew the truth was far simpler. He wasn't a champion, he wasn't a superhero, he was just a boy who had finally defended himself. But the change in how people treated him also brought new challenges. Some kids, curious and bold, wanted to test him. A few would approach him in the playground, pretending to joke, but their eyes were sharp, looking for weakness. Jamal ignored them, refusing to give in. He didn't want to fight again, he wanted peace. Yet he knew the fire inside him was still there, waiting. One afternoon, as he sat in the library, a younger boy he didn't know well approached him. The boy looked nervous but determined. "Is it true," he asked in a whisper, "that you stood up to them?" Jamal hesitated, then nodded slightly. The boy's eyes lit up. "They pick on me too," he said quietly. "But maybe they'll stop now. Maybe they'll leave me alone because they're scared of you." Those words struck Jamal harder than any punch. He realized that what he had done wasn't just about himself, it was about every kid who had been laughed at, shoved, or pushed aside. He hadn't planned to be anyone's protector, but in that moment, he understood that his fight had given hope to others. He wasn't just standing up for himself anymore. Without meaning to, he had become a symbol for those who couldn't fight back. That night, Jamal thought deeply about what had happened. The idea of being feared didn't sit well with him. He didn't want to become another bully, using his strength to scare people. But the idea of being respected, that felt different. He thought about the younger boy in the library and how his eyes had held hope. For the first time, Jamal saw that maybe his strength had a purpose beyond defending himself. Maybe it could protect others too. Still, the road wasn't easy. Some bullies, embarrassed by their defeat, began plotting ways to get back at him. They no longer underestimated him, but they didn't want to lose their place of power either. Jamal sensed their stares in the cafeteria, their whispered conversations. He knew it wasn't over, not completely. But he also knew he was no longer the same boy they had once pushed around. To channel his energy, Jamal began practicing more seriously at home. He started setting routines: push UPS, sit UPS, practicing his punches with more focus. What had once been a way to release his anger was now becoming discipline. He wanted control, not chaos. He wanted to shape his strength into something useful, something that matched the calm and thoughtful boy he still was inside. One weekend, his uncle visited and caught him training in the backyard. Instead of laughing, his uncle watched carefully, then said, "You've got power, but you need guidance. Raw strength is wild, it needs training." Jamal's eyes widened, and he asked if his uncle could help. His uncle, who had once boxed in his younger years, agreed to show him some basics. It wasn't formal coaching, but it gave Jamal structure. He learned how to keep his balance, how to breathe properly, how to strike with focus instead of just emotion. Slowly, Jamal's fire was turning into skill. At school, his reputation continued to spread. The bullies no longer dared to test him, and many of his classmates began to treat him with respect. Some even tried to befriend him, though Jamal remained cautious. He had learned that not all smiles were sincere. Still, he couldn't deny that his world was brighter than before. The loneliness that once weighed on him had lifted. He wasn't invisible anymore, and for the first time, he felt seen, not as a target but as someone strong. But Jamal didn't let the attention change who he was. He still sat quietly in class, still helped his mother at home, still loved his comic books. The difference was, now he carried himself with dignity. He wasn't pretending to be okay anymore, he was okay, because he had discovered his worth. He no longer needed to hide behind silence. His silence was now his choice, not his shield. Still, deep inside, Jamal knew the journey wasn't over. Life had tested him once, and it would test him again. The bullies had been the first challenge, but they wouldn't be the last. He felt ready, though. He understood that strength was not just in his fists, but in his heart, in his ability to choose the right path even when it was hard. As he lay in bed one night, staring at the ceiling like he often did, Jamal realized something. The boy who had once dreamed of being a superhero was no longer just dreaming. He was becoming his own kind of hero, not the kind who wore capes or masks, but the kind who carried quiet strength, who inspired others simply by standing tall. The weeks after the fight near the basketball court passed slowly, but for Jamal, every day felt like a new chapter in his life. The boy who once walked with his head lowered now moved with quiet confidence. He no longer felt the same dread when he stepped onto the bus or walked down the hallways. The air around him had changed. His classmates noticed it, the teachers noticed it, and most of all, the bullies noticed it. The teasing that had once been daily slowly faded into silence. People who once mocked him now gave him space, some even nodding at him in respect. But Jamal did not let pride control him. Deep down, he knew what had happened could have gone in another direction. He thought often about how close he had been to losing control of himself in that moment of anger. It frightened him in a quiet way, because he understood that strength, if not guided by wisdom, could easily become dangerous. That thought stayed with him as he continued his daily life. His uncle's training sessions in the backyard grew more regular. Every Saturday morning, Jamal would wake up early, tie his shoes tightly, and meet his uncle outside. They worked on footwork, breathing, balance, and patience. His uncle reminded him again and again, it's not about fighting. It's about control. Anyone can throw a punch. Not everyone can stop themselves from throwing the wrong one. Those words carved themselves into Jamal's heart. He realized that true strength wasn't in how hard he could hit, but in how well he could choose when not to. At school, Jamal became someone unexpected. He didn't chase popularity, he didn't try to show off his new reputation, but without realizing it, he was inspiring others. Some of the younger kids who had been bullied before started to walk closer to him in the hallways. They didn't say much, but their presence told him everything. They felt safer around him. A boy named Malik, who was smaller and often teased for his glasses, once asked if he could sit with Jamal at lunch. Jamal nodded, and soon, more joined. Before long, Jamal was no longer eating alone. The empty table that had once been a symbol of his loneliness became a place of quiet companionship. It surprised him at first. He had never imagined being someone others looked up to. But as the days went on, he accepted it. He didn't need to talk much, didn't need to give speeches. Just by being himself, calm, steady, and unshaken, he gave courage to others. The same bullies who once laughed at him now kept their distance, and the children who once avoided him now wanted to share his space. Still, Jamal didn't forget his past. The memories of being laughed at, the sting of stolen lunches, the long nights of silent tears, they all remained with him. But instead of weakening him, those memories became his fuel. They reminded him never to become like the ones who hurt him. They reminded him why he must use his strength for something greater than revenge. He began to dream of a future where he could do more, perhaps even train properly, join a real boxing or martial arts gym, and continue shaping the fire inside him into discipline. One day after school, Mrs. Carter, his teacher, asked him to stay behind. She had noticed the change in him and wanted to speak. "Jamal," she said gently, "I don't know what exactly happened, but I can see you've grown. You carry yourself differently now. I want you to remember this. People will follow your example. How you act now will shape not just your life, but the lives of those around you." Her words stayed with him. He walked home that day thinking about leadership, about responsibility. He realized strength wasn't just something he carried in his body. It was something he carried in his choices. At home, his mother continued to notice the changes too. She saw the way he spoke more clearly, how he seemed less afraid of the world. One evening, as they washed dishes together, she placed a hand on his shoulder and said, "I always knew you had something strong inside you. I'm proud, but I want you to always remember your heart is your greatest strength, not your fists." Jamal nodded, feeling her words settle deep within him. He understood that what made him different wasn't only his ability to fight back. It was his ability to remain kind, even after all the pain he had faced. The school year continued, and though the bullies never directly bothered him again, Jamal knew they were watching. He didn't hold grudges. He didn't seek revenge. He treated them the same way he treated everyone else: calm, steady, and firm. That balance confused them, because they couldn't control him anymore. He wasn't fueled by anger, he was fueled by self-respect. And in that, he had won a far greater battle than the one near the basketball court. There were moments when he felt tested again. Sometimes someone would mutter a small insult under their breath, testing if he would react. But Jamal had learned restraint. He didn't need to prove himself anymore. The quiet smile he gave in return was stronger than any punch. And slowly, people stopped trying to test him, because they realized Jamal wasn't playing the same game anymore. He had risen above it. In time, Jamal became known not as the fat boy or the quiet kid, but as someone dependable. Teachers trusted him with responsibilities, classmates asked for his help, and even strangers seemed to sense his steady presence. He wasn't loud, he wasn't flashy, but his quiet confidence filled every room he walked into. Years later, Jamal would look back on that period of his life and realize it was the turning point that shaped everything else. The boy who once believed he was powerless discovered his strength, not just in his body but in his spirit. He learned that standing up for yourself doesn't always mean fighting, it means refusing to let others define who you are. He learned that real strength comes with responsibility, with the choice to use it wisely. But in that moment, as a boy still finding his way, Jamal carried forward with a new sense of purpose. He no longer feared the laughter, the whispers, or the shadows of the bullies. He walked with his head high, knowing that he had survived the worst they could give him and had come out stronger. The boy they once underestimated was no longer invisible. He had become someone no one could ignore, someone whose quiet fire lit the path not only for himself but for others who needed hope. And though Jamal never sought glory, he had found something greater: self-respect, courage, and the understanding that he was more than what the world had tried to label him. In the end, Jamal's story wasn't about the fight itself. It was about transformation. It was about a boy who discovered that sometimes the people who seem the weakest carry the strongest fire inside them. And Jamal, once the target of laughter, became the proof that strength isn't about appearance, but about the courage to stand tall when the world tries to break you down.